king of German mercenaries.
Chapter 338, North American Twin Islands. In September, after leaving Grenada, Amerigo's fleet headed north along the Windward Islands, west of Barbuda, and soon arrived at the Bahamas recorded by Columbus. The subsequent voyage was relatively smooth, because the Gulf Stream on the east coast of North America pushed the fleet northward. By the end of November, the fleet had arrived at Long Island, New York. Then, Amerigo continued to command the fleet to the northeast and soon discovered Nantucket Island and Martha's Vineyard. The reason why it went so smoothly was that Marin gave the latitude of New York as 40 degrees 43 minutes north, and also gave an approximate value for the longitude. The exact longitude is not given because Marin did not follow the calculation method with Greenwich as 0 degrees, but the approximate distance is also given. New York is on the seaside, and Marin also drew the outline of Long Island, New York. Therefore, Amerigo easily arrived at Long Island, New York. Then, he continued to the northeast and soon arrived at Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket Island. After arriving at the two small islands, Amerigo did not land rashly. Because Marin had mentioned that the Indians in the northern wilderness continent, North America, were more ferocious. Before, he had also seen the ferocious side of the Indians in Grenada. For example, if the Arawaks were defeated, their men would be killed by the invading Caribbeans, and even eaten as food. Therefore, Amerigo was also worried that there were cannibalistic Indians on the two islands. If he rashly entered the jungle, he would easily be killed by them. Therefore, Amerigo first took the fleet to the freshwater estuary on the mainland to replenish fresh water. Then, he came back and circled around the two islands. While circling, Amerigo began to observe the two islands with a telescope. A few days later, Amerigo finally determined that Nantucket Island was far from the land and there were no Indians living there. The Indians used canoes and could only land on some islands close to the land. Martha's Vineyard is closer to the land, so there are traces of Indian activities on the island. However, Amerigo found that there was only a row of thatched houses in a bay in the north of Martha's Vineyard. However, there was no one in the thatched houses. Therefore, Amerigo concluded that this was a seasonal settlement of Indian fishermen. Probably, during the spring and summer fishing seasons, fishermen from the mainland would go to the island and use it as a harbor and base for fishing. Now it was the end of November, winter, and those fishermen probably returned to the land to spend the winter. After making his judgment, Amerigo carefully took 30 sailors with strong combat capabilities, put on armor, and boarded Martha's Vineyard. After more than a day of searching, they found no other Indian villages. Of course, they only searched the area on the north side of the island. After all, they did not bring any horses. Then, Amerigo led his men to search Nantucket Island, but found no traces of human activity. Moreover, there was a very good harbor on the north side of Nantucket Island, which was suitable as a port. This harbor was a very good sheltered harbor because it was semi-enclosed. Moreover, Amerigo believed that the island was more suitable as a frontier base for colonization because there was no interference from Indians. Martha's Vineyard was too close to the mainland, so Indians could easily reach the island even if they were in canoes. Not only that, Nantucket Island is large enough, and the island's animal and plant resources are abundant, which is enough to support the lives of many people. When the fleet was cruising around the island, Amerigo also found that various fish frequently jumped out of the sea in the waters around the island. Obviously, the fishery resources here are very rich. In addition, there are freshwater resources on the island. When Amerigo visited the island, he found that the western half of the island had abundant fresh water resources and a flat terrain, which was very suitable for cultivation as a farm. The eastern part had a more rugged terrain, but it was no problem to use it as a pasture. Of course, before reclamation, there were towering trees everywhere on the island, many of which were oaks suitable for shipbuilding. There were also some fir and pine trees. In short, if a colony was established on the island, there would be no shortage of wood. Similarly, there are countless trees that can be cut down on Martha's Vineyard. In short, in terms of wood, the two islands are extremely rich in wood resources. Moreover, these trees are extremely tall. Obviously, most of them are hundreds of years old. Amerigo made detailed surveys of the two small islands of Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard, much more thoroughly than he had done on Grenada. After all, Grenada is a tropical island. Although Marin repeatedly assured that there were no poisonous insects on Grenada, Amerigo didn't really believe it. Because Marin himself had never been there. As a navigator, Amerigo knew that there were many poisonous snakes and poisonous insects on tropical islands. Therefore, he did not dare to take the risk of exploring deep into Grenada. But the situation was different on the twin islands of North America. This was a temperate zone. Moreover, because it was winter, even poisonous snakes and insects hibernated. That was why Amerigo dared to explore everywhere. After about 10 days of exploration on the two islands of North America, Amerigo concluded that Nantucket Island was more suitable as the first stop for colonizing the North Wilderness, North America. Even more, a shipbuilding base could be built on Nantucket Island. Nantucket Island is not small, much larger than Texel Island. There are so many woods on the island, and after they are dried enough, they can be used to build many ships. As a navigator, Amerigo was very sensitive to oak for shipbuilding. On Nantucket Island, he saw hundreds of huge old oak trees over 30 meters tall, which were very suitable for the keel of the ship. Other pine and fir trees could also be used to make masts, decks and other parts. However, although the oak wood is abundant, the wood used for shipbuilding needs to be cut down and air-dried for 1 or 2 years before it is suitable for building seagoing ships. Therefore, it is impossible to build ships on the island in a short period of time. However, Amerigo knew that Marin was determined to colonize the northern wilderness continent. Therefore, he was not worried about the time issue. Because Marin would definitely build a permanent settlement on the island in the future, and there would be plenty of time to wait for the cut oak trees to dry. Moreover, Amerigo now believed in Marin's judgment. From the tree resources on the two small islands, he could infer that there would be many old oak trees suitable for shipbuilding on the northern desert continent. For example, on Nantucket Island, he found hundreds of old oak trees that were hundreds of years old. In Europe, such oak trees were strategic resources belonging to kings and nobles, and if they were sold, the price would be very high. Therefore, considering the oak resources alone, colonizing the northern wilderness continent is not a loss. Amerigo now agrees with Marin's plan to build a shipyard here. After all, it was too troublesome to transport those oversized timbers that were over 30 meters long back to Europe, so it was better to set up a shipyard and build ships locally. After the ships were built, they could be directly driven back to Europe for use. Before leaving, Amerigo recorded the coordinates of the two islands in detail for reference next time. Then, he set sail and, following the secret outline map given by Marin, began to sail northeast, preparing to return to Europe. Chapter 339, Reinforcements arrived. The small town of Mels, where the Tamina Gorge and the Rhine Valley meet in Switzerland, is the meeting point of the Graubünden region, the Principality of Liechtenstein and the canton of St. Gallen, and belongs to the land of St. Gallen. At this time, the St. Gallen region had not yet established the St. Gallen canton, and the political forces were relatively complex. Some regions joined the Swiss alliance, while others remained neutral. Strictly speaking, St. Gallen was a diocese. However, Appenzell and Toggenburg within the jurisdiction were not controlled by the Church. These forces were inclined to the Swiss alliance, but had not yet expressed their intention to join. After all, the Swiss had not yet completely defeated the Emperor, and the three major forces decided to wait and see. But during the Swiss attack on Graubünden, the forces of St. Gall acquiesced to the passage of the Swiss army. This is because the only way to enter Graubünden from the north is to enter the Rhine Gorge from the Tamina Gorge southeast of the St. Gallen area. Then, follow the Rhine Gorge upstream to reach the Graubünden area. When the Emperor learned that the Swiss army was about to attack, he sent troops across the turbulent upper reaches of the Rhine. In this area, the Rhine River canyon east of the river belongs to Graubünden, and the narrow area west of the river belongs to St. Gallen, occupied Meers, and built strong fortifications to resist the Swiss attack. Because the valley was narrow, the Swiss could not maneuver, so they had to mobilize artillery to bombard the defense line in an attempt to break through the Tamina Gorge. At the same time, during the bombardment, the Swiss would send people to forcibly climb the wall built by Maximilian I, trying to forcibly seize Mels and open the road. The Swiss did not have their own artillery, but King Louis XII of France supported the Swiss in taking Graubünden. Because Louis XII hoped that the Swiss would seize Graubünden and cut off the Muster Valley, the road for Maximilian I to interfere in Italy. Therefore, the French sent a lot of artillery for free to assist the Swiss in attacking. Coupled with the Swiss fearless attacks, the Meers line was in danger many times. But Maximilian I knew the importance of this place and sent many elite soldiers to garrison. If the Austrian soldiers were on the plains, they might not be able to defeat the Swiss. However, relying on the solid defense line, they could barely withstand the attack of the Swiss. However, under the French artillery fire, they were not in a good condition and suffered heavy losses. At the end of November, Frundsberg finally brought reinforcements from the direction of Liechtenstein along the Rhine Valley and entered the Emperor's control area. The Principality of Liechtenstein and the Swabian League were neighbors with close relations. Therefore, the reinforcements from Frundsberg passed smoothly, including the 20 front-loading bronze 3-pound cannons brought by Frundsberg. Fortunately, the 3-pound cannons were easy to maneuver. If they were heavier, they would not be able to pass through the rugged mountain roads and reach Mels in the Plateau Valley. After arriving in Mels, Frundsberg first went to Ch to meet Maximilian I, who was in charge there, and expressed his loyalty. The emperor was very happy that Marin could send reinforcements. Although he felt that the number of people was a little small, he could understand Marin's situation. After encouraging Frundsberg, Maximilian I sent Frundsberg to Mels again, asking him to stop the Swiss attack. Of course, the emperor also needed to provide Frundsberg's army with enough gunpowder, lead, and shells. After all, Frundsberg brought 800 musketeers and 23-pound cannons, and the demand for gunpowder was huge. However, despite the high consumption of gunpowder, it was very worthwhile. After Frundsberg and his men boarded the Mels line, the power of the musketeers immediately became apparent. Although the Swiss were fearless and many of their vanguard soldiers wore breastplates and helmets, they were met with muskets. Those Swiss mercenaries who bravely climbed the high walls had to be blasted off the walls by the musketeers like dumplings. You know, Frundsberg brought 800 musketeers with him, and there were 266 musketeers firing at the same time in 3 rounds of shooting. The defense line of Mels was not wide, and 266 muskets fired at the same time, and the offensive of the Swiss mercenaries was immediately beaten back. The unwilling Swiss stopped the attack, pulled out the 20 breech-loading bronze cannons given by the French, and began to bombard the city walls. But Frundsberg also brought cannons. So Frundsberg also pulled the front-loading 3-pound bronze cannons to the city wall and began to bombard the French cannons. You know, the breech-loading guns, also known as Frundsberg guns, of that era were not as powerful as muzzle-loading guns because of their poor air retention. Therefore, in the artillery battle, Frundsberg's artillery had the upper hand and forced the Swiss to retreat. After several days of fierce fighting, the Swiss suffered huge losses and had to stop the attack. Of course, Maximilian I also consumed a lot of gunpowder, which made him very distressed. You know, gunpowder is very expensive these days. A cannon shot is worth a lot of gold. So, while Maximilian I enjoyed the victory, he was also very distressed about the consumption of gunpowder. But no matter what, victory is the most important. Compared with the control of the huge Graubünden region, the large investment in gunpowder is still insignificant. Under the attack of the guns and artillery of Frundsberg's soldiers, it was very difficult to attack Mels. In desperation, the Swiss had to find another way. After all, Graubünden still had a pass in the west to attack. Therefore, only a part of the Swiss army on the north route was left, and the rest were pulled to the west, intending to open the defense of Graubünden from the west. As long as they entered the Graubünden area, the Swiss were fully confident that they could defeat the Austrian army and complete the occupation and control of the Graubünden area of more than 7,000 square kilometers. Even after controlling the Graubünden region, the Swiss could directly threaten the western part of Austria and cut off Austria's route south to Italy. It can be said that whoever controls Graubünden has the initiative. Maximilian I controls Graubünden, which gives him the ability to interfere in Italy and use the rugged terrain to block the Swiss. The Swiss also had their own strategic goal, which was not to occupy Graubünden, but because, by controlling Graubünden, they could threaten the security of Austria. Threatening the security of Austria could make Maximilian I surrender and agree to Swiss autonomy. The biggest wish of the Swiss is that the Habsburgs give up their desire for Swiss territory and allow Switzerland to have a high degree of autonomy. But this is very difficult, because most of Switzerland was originally the territory of the Habsburgs, but was forcibly separated from the Habsburgs during the Luxembourg dynasty. Therefore, the Habsburgs have always been resentful and hope to take back these territories. You know, the Swiss canton of Aargau is the birthplace of the Habsburg family. Of course, the Habsburg family was unwilling to give up their ancestral land. Therefore, the Swiss wanted to use force to force the Habsburg family to abandon their covetousness for Switzerland and obtain a high degree of autonomy, which is actually no different from independence. In the original history, after Maximilian I was involved in the Swabian War, he was defeated by the Swiss and forced to agree to Swiss autonomy. But because of Marin's intervention, at this time and space, Maximilian I was busy occupying Graubünden and was not in a hurry to get involved in the Swabian War. Naturally, he was not defeated by the Swiss and signed the terms agreeing to Swiss autonomy. Therefore, the Swiss were naturally unwilling to accept that their political goals had not been achieved. Originally, Maximilian I did not interfere in the Swabian War, and the Swiss were not in a position to take the initiative to provoke. But when Maximilian I finally could not help but interfere, the Swiss immediately set their sights on the emperor in order to force him to agree to Swiss autonomy and for the Habsburg family to give up their covetousness for Swiss land. Therefore, the Swiss were unwilling to give up before achieving this goal. Although they did not win in Mels, north of the Graubünden region, the Swiss quickly mobilized their main forces to attack the pass west of Graubünden. In short, the Swiss would not give up until they entered Graubünden and forced the emperor to agree to their political demands. Chapter 340 Sisters and Wives and Concubines. Angela was brainwashed by Marin's Oriental stories, so now she feels that as a big wife, it's okay to bully the concubine. Especially, this concubine is her own sister. So, during this period of time, Angela began to set rules for Felice, following Marin's stories about the Oriental backyard. Felice was also very guilty because she was caught by her sister on the spot, so she followed her sister's wishes, so that her sister would not drive her away if she was not happy, leaving her without food and clothing. So, the two sisters followed the rules of the Eastern Chinese harem and privately decided on the status of wives and concubines. Of course, the person behind all this was Marin. According to Marin's story, Angela made a rule for Felice, stipulating that Angela had to pay respects to her mistress every day except when she was sick or pregnant. Of course, Angela didn't know the rules of the East, so she only asked Felice to come over and bow to her every day, and then sit aside and wait for the mistress to lecture her. In fact, this was already very close to the rules of the East. However, in some Chinese families with strict rules, concubines even had to kneel down to the main wife. However, kneeling was not popular in Europe, so Angela naturally only asked for bowing. Moreover, although there were only two sisters, Angela still arranged a sleeping schedule according to Marin's story. As the maker of the schedule, Angela directly assigned Monday to Friday to herself, leaving only Saturday and Sunday for Felice. Not only that, Angela also asked Felice to wait until she was pregnant before she could have sex with Marin again. Before that, Felice was not allowed to have sex with Marin even 2 days a week. Of course, blindly suppressing is not good either. According to Marin, after hitting the opponent with a stick, you have to give him 2 sweet dates to truly subdue him. Therefore, Angela also gave Felice the best treatment second only to herself. For example, in terms of clothing, Angela freely provided Felice with beautiful silk clothes. Moreover, she also arranged a special maid to serve Felice. Angela consulted Marin about the maid she arranged. Marin wanted to please Angela, so he told her that the maid she arranged for the concubine must be someone she trusted. In this way, when the maid was serving the concubine, she could observe the concubine's every move and secretly report to the mistress to avoid the concubine's bad idea of murdering the wife. Angela agreed with this, so she assigned 4 maids to Felice, all of whom were people she trusted. In addition to taking care of Felice, they also had to monitor Felice's words and deeds to prevent her from having any unfavorable thoughts about Angela. In fact, Felice is just a 17-year-old girl, how can there be so many twists and turns? Angela, on the other hand, has learned a lot of bad ideas from Marin, the sinister man. Of course, when the two sisters are older and have more thoughts, it will be hard to say. After all, people always grow up. The two sisters are still young and their minds are still relatively simple. When they are in their 30s or 40s and have more experience, perhaps the house fights will be more intense. However, in Europe, it is difficult for house fights to intensify, because in the end, women's fights are all about seeking inheritance rights for their sons. However, European law only protects the inheritance rights of children born to a legal wife. As for children born to a mistress, they have no inheritance rights. In fact, their inheritance rights are not as good as those of a distant relative. Therefore, Angela did not have to worry about Felice giving birth to a son and threatening the status of her children, because European bastards did not have any inheritance rights at all. In Europe, the only chance for an illegitimate child is that the male owner can find ways to subsidize the illegitimate child while he is still alive. The higher the status of the male owner, the more compensation he can give to the illegitimate child. For example, a king could find ways to confer an earl title on his illegitimate son, or at the very least, a baron with a territory. However, for lower-ranking nobles, the male owner could provide less subsidies for his illegitimate son. At most, he could give him some monetary compensation. As the monarch of a county, Marin would certainly be able to give good compensation to his illegitimate son in the future. At worst, he could be sent to a colony to become a colonial baron. Although not as valuable as a native European baron, he was still a hereditary noble. When no one was around, Marin quietly talked to Felice. Marin showed Felice the outline of the North American continent and promised that in the future, he would give Felice's children a piece of fertile land that was larger than the county of East Frisia. Moreover, he would give as many lands as he had sons. After all, there was too much land in North America to be granted. It was precisely because of Marin's promise, Marin even swore an oath, that Felice was willing to accept her sister's oppression and restrain her strong character that wanted to compete with her sister. In fact, Marin did not make this promise casually, but made a deliberate arrangement. He did not know how many children he would have in the end, but he knew that even if he had 10 sons and each son was granted 100,000 square kilometers of vast and fertile land, it would only be 1 million square kilometers. How big is North America? The eastern coast alone has millions of square kilometers of fertile land. So, even if you have 100 sons, North America is so big, and there are Australia and other things, there is definitely not enough to divide them all. Marin actually knew that colonies could not exist for long. The people in the colonies would not be willing to live in a place that would always be a colony. So, one day, the colonies would demand independence. If the colonies were handed over to outsiders, and they became independent someday, Marin's descendants would be left with nothing. However, if North America was divided among his descendants, even if a colony became independent someday, it would still be the territory of his descendants. Even if not every colony was controlled by his descendants when it became independent, as long as there was one colony still controlled by Marin's descendants, it would not be considered a failure. Therefore, for the vast North American continent, Marin's idea was to divide this continent into regions and give it to his descendants as fiefdoms. In the future, Marin will encourage his sons to have more sons, even illegitimate ones. Then he will divide their respective fiefdoms among their sons. In this way, there will be endless descendants. Hundreds of years later, when the colonies become independent, all the nobles in these places are his descendants. No matter who wins, Marin will be happy to see it. In fact, Marin's idea coincides with Zhu Yuanzhang's idea. Zhu Yuanzhang did not exclude his descendants from competing for the throne, because after all the fighting, it was still Zhu Yuanzhang's descendants who won in the end. However, Zhu Yuanzhang gave the central plains to his sons, which made the successor emperors weak, which was not desirable. If Zhu Yuanzhang had given land outside the central plains to his sons and encouraged them to expand and colonize, perhaps the whole world would have the surname Zhu. This is exactly what Marin thinks. He believes that if you get such vast and fertile places as North America, South America and Australia, you are lucky, but if you lose them, it is not a pity. Giving the other sons and illegitimate sons other than the eldest son to colonies will neither weaken the eldest son's power or make the other sons have bad ideas about the homeland. Because these colonies are thousands of miles away from the mainland, they can form their own systems. By then, the countries controlled by Marin's descendants will no longer be close neighbors, but distant relatives. Distant relatives will not have many conflicts because they have few opportunities to interact with each other. Although there is an old saying that distant relatives are not as good as close neighbors, in fact, close neighbors not only help each other, but also have many conflicts. There will be no conflict between two people who do not come into contact with each other. Conflicts only occur between people who come into contact with each other. You will compare your education and income with your neighbor's children, but will you compare with a foreigner? No, because you cannot come into contact with each other. Therefore, by spreading their descendants all over the world, when there are no direct conflicts between them, they will be united by blood ties. Anyway, for now, the vast lands of North America, South America, Australia and Africa are all no man's land. As for the indigenous people, who cares about their opinions? Rather than leaving these fertile lands to British, French, Spanish or other colonists, it is better to leave them to your own sons. Even if the descendants of your own sons fight each other in the future, the final winner will be your own family. It will not be a bargain for outsiders.